Imagine you are driving down a busy highway at like 65 miles an hour. You're totally, completely relaxed, listening to the radio, tapping the steering wheel.
Right, just a normal commute.
Exactly. But suddenly, without any warning at all, someone sneaks up and swaps your car's windshield for a pair of distorted Funhouse mirrors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Instantly, the cars in the lane next to you look like, I don't know, towering, jagged monsters. The straight lane lines twist into these terrifying zigzags.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It really is. The distance between your bumper and the truck ahead of you just looks like it vanished. You would panic.
Oh, absolutely. I'd slam on the brakes immediately.
Right. You'd slam on the brakes, maybe swerve into the shoulder. Your heart is just pounding out of your chest. And if someone sitting in the passenger seat calmly told you, like, hey, there's no danger, it's just a normal Tuesday, you would think they were completely insane.
Yeah, you'd pull over to figure out what was wrong with your eyes.
Exactly. But what if I told you that you do this exact same thing to your brain almost every single night, and instead of pulling over, you just keep driving, utterly convinced that the monsters are real?
That is, honestly, the terrifying reality of what we are dealing with. We all walk around with this unspoken assumption that our perception of the world is, well, it's a fixed, objective documentary.
Like we're just recording facts.
Right. We believe that if an email from a boss reads as aggressive, it's because the boss is objectively aggressive. If the world feels overwhelmingly bleak and hopeless, it's because the world is actually bleak and hopeless.
We trust our own eyes and ears implicitly.
We do. We trust our own emotional reactions to be faithful reflections of reality. The idea that our internal biological state could, so completely rewrite the external world, it's something most people simply refuse to accept.
And that refusal is exactly what we are tearing down today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, by the way. I'm so glad you're joining us for this one. We are pulling from a really fascinating, dense stack of text excerpts today.
Yeah, a brilliant conceptual framework by an author named Ian.
Right, Ian. And this framework spans several of his books, including Underload, Emotional Mastery, The 30-Day Reset, and Fix Your Metabolism. And I just want to warn you right now, this is not a gentle conversation about sleep hygiene.
Definitely not. We aren't going to tell you to buy a nicer mattress or try chamomile tea.
No, the mission for today's deep dive is to unpack this incredibly harsh but stunningly accurate lens on human biology. We are going to explore two mind-bending concepts that will, quite frankly, completely alter how you view your own identity.
It really does shift everything.
First, we're going to look at how poor sleep literally distorts your ability to perceive reality, how it swaps out that windshield. And second, we're going to explore why the act of sleeping is the fundamental, non-negotiable requirement for having any actual free will or personal agency in your life.
It demands a total paradigm shift. It really strips away the illusion that your mind is like some pristine disembodied software floating in the cloud, completely independent of the meat and bone hardware it actually runs on.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin to understand this framework, we really have to talk about how the modern world currently views sleep.
Which is terribly.
Terribly. Right now, sleep is relentlessly marketed to us as wellness. It's grouped in with, taking a bubble bath, going to a spa, treating yourself to a nice brunch.
It's seen as a luxury.
Exactly. It's self-care theater. But Ian completely obliterates that idea. He says sleep is not a side issue. It is not a reward for a hard day's work. Sleep is load-bearing infrastructure.
The word infrastructure is so critical here because it changes the whole sequence of how we value our biological functions.
How so?
Well, think about a city planner building a new metropolis. They don't build the glittering skyscrapers, the high-end coffee shops, and the movie theaters first, and then say, what would be a nice wellness treat for this city? A sewer system.
Right. Let's treat ourselves to an electrical grid.
Exactly. No, the sewer and the grid are the infrastructure. If they don't exist, the skyscraper is just a dark, uninhabitable tower of glass.
In Ian's model, the human body and mind are constantly referred to as the machine.
The machine. I like that.
Yeah. And sleep is the subterranean infrastructure of that machine. If you don't service it, the machine literally cannot support the weight of a conscious, functioning life.
I love that distinction, but I do want to push back a little, or, well, maybe just confess how I, and probably you listening, actually treat this on a daily basis.
Let's hear it.
Because I don't think of it as infrastructure. I think of sleep exactly like the battery icon on my smartphone.
Oh, that is such a common way to look at it.
Right. If I only get 5 hours of sleep, I wake up, and my mental battery icon is yellow. It's at, say, 40%. But I tell myself, hey, As long as it isn't dead, as long as I'm not literally falling asleep at my desk, I can push through.
You think you just have less energy, but everything else works fine. Exactly. I'll grab a massive iced coffee, I'll put my headphones on, and I'll drag that 40% all the way to 5 o'clock. Why is that energy battery metaphor fundamentally wrong?
Because treating sleep purely as a daily energy recharge ignores the literal physical degradation of the hardware. The battery metaphor tricks you into believing that the only consequence of losing sleep is a shorter duration of wakefulness.
Hmm.
But let's take your smartphone analogy further. What happens when you constantly run a lithium-ion battery down to 1%, let it overheat, and only charge it in quick, erratic bursts?
Oh, the battery's maximum capacity permanently degrades. Like, my old phone would start shutting off randomly when it said it had 20% left.
Exactly. The actual chemical structure of the battery is damaged. And this brings us to Ian's concept of maintenance debt.
Maintenance debt.
Yes, when you miss sleep, you aren't just starting your day with a lower charge. You are starting your day with a machine that is structurally compromised. The internal wear and tear is physically higher.
So it's not a fresh start every morning.
Not at all. Every day you fail to fully service the machine, you are adding to a cumulative debt that leaves you closer to a catastrophic system failure before you even get out of bed.
So if sleep isn't just plugging myself into a wall charger to get some arbitrary energy back, what is physically happening in the dark?
That's the real question.
Right, we need to look under the hood, because I feel like if we don't understand the literal physiological mechanics of this nightly servicing, we can't possibly grasp why it hijacks our behavior during the day.
Well, we have to move past the idea that sleep is just turning off. In underload, sleep is defined as active, aggressive, physiological restoration.
Active. I always feel like I'm doing nothing.
It feels that way to your consciousness, but physically. It is the most biologically busy time of your entire 24-hour cycle. The machine is performing massive, complex jobs that it physically cannot do while you are conscious.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that. Because the first major job of sleep in this framework is physiological restoration and waste clearance. I vaguely know that the brain cleans itself, but I really want to understand how. While I am awake, what is actually building up in my head?
Well, every single time a neuron fires in your brain, every time you make a decision, read an email, or feel an emotion, that cellular activity creates metabolic byproducts.
Like exhaust from a car engine.
Exactly like exhaust. One of the most prominent byproducts is a chemical called adenosine, which builds up as a marker of cellular exhaustion. But there are also heavier, more toxic byproducts, like beta-amyloid proteins.
And my brain just leaves them there during the day.
It has to. During the day, your waking brain is so overwhelmingly preoccupied with keeping you alive, processing visual stimuli, and balancing your body that it simply does not have the biological bandwidth to clean up the cellular trash. The waste just accumulates in the tissue.
Oh, wow. It's like a busy restaurant kitchen during the Friday night dinner rush.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. The chefs, which are my waking brain, they're just desperately trying to get the meals out. Food is flying everywhere, grease is splattering, tickets are piling up, they don't have time to stop, pull out a mop, and degrease the fryers while they are actively cooking a steak.
No, they would burn the food.
Exactly.
That analogy is biologically spot on. The brain cannot cook and clean at the same time. So what happens when you finally enter deep, slow-wave sleep? The brain initiates a completely different protocol.
The cleaning crew arrives.
The glymphatic system activates. This is the brain's specialized waste clearance network. And the mechanics of this are stunning. During deep sleep, the glial cells in your brain, the supportive cells around your neurons, actually shrink in size by up to 60%.
Wait. The physical cells in my brain shrink?
They literally shrink, opening up physical space between the brain tissue.
That is wild.
It is. And this shrinkage allows cerebrospinal fluid to rush in and powerfully wash through the brain, flushing all that adenosine, beta-amyloid, and toxic debris out into the bloodstream to be processed by the liver.
Like a biological power wash.
Exactly. Now, if you cut your sleep short, or if you don't get enough deep, slow-wave sleep, you are basically firing the overnight cleaning crew halfway through their shift.
Which means I am walking into my mental kitchen the next morning. The floors are still covered in yesterday's grease, the trash cans are overflowing, and I am demanding my chefs cook a gourmet 5-star meal.
And then you wonder why the food tastes terrible.
You are demanding high-level executive function from an organ that is literally suffocating in its own neurotoxic waste.
That's exactly what's happening.
That is deeply unsettling, but it explains so much about brain fog. But if my brain is swimming in physical garbage, how does that affect the rest of my body? Because it's not just a head problem, right? This leads into the second massive job of sleep, resetting stress chemistry.
Right. The buildup of waste in the brain is perceived by the body as a biological stressor. When the machine is structurally compromised from a lack of cleaning, the entire nervous system goes on the defensive.
It panics.
It does. And this brings us to the regulation of cortisol in the sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. It's the accelerator pedal that releases adrenaline and cortisol to help you survive a threat.
Like running away from a bear. Or, in modern terms, dealing with a furious client on a Zoom call.
The mechanism is the exact same for both. Now, a healthy, well-serviced machine will spike cortisol to deal with the threat and then naturally bring it back down when the threat passes.
Okay, that sounds normal.
It is. And sleep is the primary mechanism for resetting that baseline. But if you fail to sleep adequately, the HPA axis, the system that controls your stress hormones, becomes totally dysregulated.
So we get stuck on.
Yes. You wake up the next morning with an elevated baseline of cortisol. Your sympathetic nervous system is already engaged the moment you open your eyes.
Let me make sure I am grasping the reality of this. Before I have even looked at my phone, before I've gotten out of bed or spoken to my partner, my blood is already coursing with the exact same stress chemicals that it would if I were in actual physical danger.
You are waking up at a neurochemical boil. The machine is starting the day dangerously close to its absolute operational limit. It takes almost nothing to push you over the edge because you are already hovering right on the cliff face.
Which makes total sense why a tiny inconvenience like dropping a spoon or spilling coffee can completely ruin my morning when I haven't slept.
It feels like a catastrophe.
It does. It's not that the spilled coffee is a real tragedy. It's that my stress accelerator is already pinned to the floor and the spilled coffee just broke the engine.
Exactly.
And that introduces the third major job, which really seems to tie this all together. Ian talks about how sleep restores the conditions required for choice. He specifically points to something called the parasympathetic state and heart rate variability. Can you explain how the parasympathetic side of this works?
Sure. If the sympathetic nervous system is the accelerator, the parasympathetic nervous system is the brake. It is the rest and digest mode.
Okay, the brake.
And the primary biological cable that controls this braking system is the vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem all the way down through your heart, lungs, and gut. Ian refers to this mechanism as the vagal brake.
The vagal brake.
Right. When the vagal brake is strong, it actively slows your heart rate down and calms your breathing even in the middle of a stressful event.
So the vagal brake is what allows me to keep my cool. And Ian uses heart rate variability, or HRV, to measure how well this brake is working. I've seen HRV on my smartwatch, but I honestly never knew why I should care about it. Why is variability a good thing? Shouldn't I want a perfectly steady heart rate?
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? But a perfectly steady heartbeat, like a metronome, is actually a sign of severe biological stress.
Really?
Yeah, you want variability. If we connect this to the bigger picture, as you breathe in, your heart rate should slightly speed up. As you breathe out, the vagal brake should engage and your heart rate should slow down. That micro-variation between beats the HRV means your nervous system is incredibly agile.
Oh, I see.
It can hit the gas and instantly hit the brake. It is highly responsive.
It's like having high-end noise-canceling headphones.
How so?
Well, the chip inside those headphones is constantly dynamically reading the chaotic noise outside and micro-adjusting the internal frequencies to cancel it out, leaving you with pure silence. So high HRV means my vagal brake is rapidly micro-adjusting to all the stress around me, actively canceling out the biological noise so I can stay calm and think clearly.
A phenomenal analogy. And deep sleep is the only time the machine can physically repair and upgrade that noise-canceling chip.
And if you don't sleep?
The vagal brake gets worn down, the grip slips, your HRV plummets, you wake up with a foot stuck on the accelerator due to the high cortisol, and a completely shattered braking system.
And this is where Ian drops the hammer. He writes, sleep is not mainly about energy, it is about agency. That connects all the dots. We aren't just talking about being sleepy. We are talking about whether or not you have the physical, neurological hardware required to make a conscious choice today.
Exactly. If you have no vagal brake, You literally cannot stop yourself from reacting. The biological space between something happening to you and you reacting to it just collapses.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because now that we understand this physiological wreckage, the unwashed neurotoxins, the boiling cortisol, the broken vagal brake, we can look at how this hardware failure actually alters what we see.
The distortion of reality.
Right. We can look at how it warps the mind's interpretation of the world. And Ian uses this brilliant defining concept to explain it. He calls it tone.
Tone is the diagnostic centerpiece of both underload and emotional mastery. Ian defines tone as your current, real-time, load-bearing capacity.
Load-bearing capacity.
Yes. It is the system's ability to hold a signal without collapsing into noise or a blind reaction.
Let's ground this concept of tone for the listener. Think about it like an audio signal going through a speaker system. If you have a massive, high-quality amplifier that is high tone, you can play a wildly complex, aggressive piece of heavy metal music at top volume.
And it sounds clear.
Exactly. Even though the music is intense, the speaker handles it. It stays crisp. You can hear every guitar string, every drum beat. That is your brain being able to handle a complex, highly stressful day at the office and actually seeing the stress clearly for what it is. You hold the signal.
Now imagine playing that exact same heavy metal song at the exact same volume through a cheap, blown-out $3 speaker.
Just awful noise.
That is low tone. The minute the music hits the speaker, it distorts. The signal shatters. It just becomes screeching, chaotic, painful noise. The song is identical. The hardware changed.
The hardware changed. Wow.
When a human being operates with low tone resulting from chronic maintenance debt and poor sleep, they literally lose the ability to hold the signal of reality without distorting it.
And what happens when we distort reality? Ian makes a point here that is, frankly, chilling. He argues that the greatest danger of a low-tone machine isn't bad behavior. It's not that you eat an entire pizza or yell at your kids. The supreme danger is perception. Your calibration gets thrown off.
This elevates the conversation far beyond typical self-help. When we talk about being tired, we usually focus on output, like, I was tired, so I did a bad job.
Yeah.
Ian focuses on input. Low tone alters what looks true to you.
What looks true?
Yes. Because your threat threshold has been artificially lowered by that morning cortisol spike we talked about, your brain starts interpreting perfectly neutral data as highly dangerous.
He gives some brutal examples of this in the text. Because of poor sleep, neutral things read as loaded. Small stimuli hit a nervous system that is already pre-activated.
Right, the alarm is already ringing.
So a perfectly neutral look on your partner's face across the breakfast table suddenly reads as absolute contempt.
Or a minor piece of constructive feedback from a colleague feels like an aggressive, targeted attempt to ruin your career.
The machine is scanning the environment through the lens of its own fragility, and it goes even deeper into your internal landscape. Ian writes that when tone is low, the craving feels necessary. The threat feels real. And then he delivers what might be the most devastating line in the entire framework. Hopelessness feels like insight.
Yeah, that line is a gut punch.
Oh, man, let's just sit with that for a second.
Hopelessness feels like insight.
Mm-hmm.
I think about my own life with this. I will have these deeply profound philosophical moments of pessimism on a Tuesday afternoon.
I think we all do.
Right. I will sit there and have this dark realization that my career is pointless, that the world is entirely broken, that my relationships are failing, and that nothing is ever going to work out. I will feel like I have pierced the veil and finally seen the dark truth of the universe.
You feel like a philosopher.
Yes. Are you telling me that might not be a brilliant intellectual revelation? That it might literally just be my unwashed, exhausted biological machine misinterpreting its own lack of sleep as a universal truth? That is the ultimate deception of a low-tone machine. You are mistaking a state problem for a truth problem.
A state problem for a truth problem.
Exactly. The machine is depleted, it is running on fumes, it is swimming in stress chemistry, its Vagal Brake is completely shot. But instead of the brain simply communicating alert, our biological capacity is currently low, we should seek a nap, the ego gets involved.
Of course it does.
The brain projects its internal state outward onto the world. It looks through the dirty, distorted windshield of its own exhaustion and declares, the world is exhausting and hopeless.
That is so wild. And honestly, a little embarrassing. It means we cannot trust our own despair when we are in maintenance debt.
You really can't.
We are wearing dark, tinted sunglasses and assuming the actual sun just burned out. The profound problem isn't just what tiredness makes you do. The profound problem is what tiredness makes the world look like. We are exhausting ourselves, fighting ghosts that our own compromised nervous system is projecting onto the wall.
It demands a total rewrite of how we handle our mental health on a day-to-day basis. Think about the standard modern response to feeling overwhelmed with dread.
We try to outthink it.
Right.
Yeah.
We journal about our childhood trauma. We listen to philosophy podcasts to figure out why society is decaying. We try to logically debate the dread away. Ian's framework suggests that this is entirely backward.
Backward.
Yes. Before you attempt to do high-level philosophical analysis on your life, you need to look at the diagnostic trail your tone. You need to ask, did the machine restore properly last night? Because if it didn't, you aren't doing philosophy. You are just hallucinating from maintenance debt.
Man. So if our perception is this easily hijacked, if our low-tone machine views a perfectly neutral world and flags everything as a 5-alarm fire, how does that affect our ability to actually navigate the day?
It completely compromises it.
How does that affect our ability to make choices when we are confronted with these perceived threats? Because this leads us directly to the absolute battleground of our impulses.
It leads us directly into what Ian calls, in emotional mastery, the 100-millisecond war.
A 100-millisecond war?
Yes. This is the microscopic, almost imperceptible gap in time between a stimulus hitting your nervous system and your physical reaction to it. This tiny window, these 100 milliseconds, is the only place where personal agency actually exists. It is where free will is either retained or completely lost.
Explain the neuroanatomy of this 100-millisecond war. What is physically happening in the brain in that tiny gap of time?
Let's trace the biology of a stressor. Say someone suddenly cuts you off in traffic.
Okay, classic stressor.
That visual information enters your brain and immediately goes to the amygdala. That's the primitive fear center that acts as the alarm bell. Now, in a fully restored, high-tone state, the machine has enough structural integrity to hold that tension.
So the vagal brake kicks in.
Exactly. The vagal brake we discussed earlier engages. It actively slows the electrical reaction down just enough for the signal to travel to the prefrontal cortex, the modern, rational, executive part of your brain behind your forehead.
So in that high-tone state, the thinking brain gets those crucial 100 milliseconds to evaluate the situation.
Yes.
It says, okay, that car cut me off. It was reckless, it was annoying, but I am physically safe, there was no collision. I'll just tap my brakes, let them go, and keep listening to the radio. You made a conscious choice. You retained your agency.
You successfully held the signal without collapsing into an automatic reaction.
Yeah.
But what happens in a low-tone, sleep-deprived state?
It all falls apart.
The system is already structurally weak. The cortisol is already pinning the accelerator to the floor. The noise-canceling vagal brake is broken. When that exact same car cuts you off, the amygdala fires, and because there is no biological brake to slow the signal down, it instantly initiates a full-body defensive reaction.
It just bypasses logic.
Entirely. The information literally never makes it to the prefrontal cortex in time for a rational decision to be made.
You act before you think.
Yeah.
Literally. Not as a cute metaphor, but as a hard neurological reality. The thinking brain isn't even invited to the meeting. Ian talks about this concept of the gate in our minds. The gate is what stands between a raw impulse and a physical action. And he points out that sleep dictates whether the gate has any steel in it.
This raises what might be the single most uncomfortable question in Ian's entire framework. How much of what we judge as weak character in ourselves and others, the explosive anger, the lack of discipline, the petty arguments, is actually just a compromised biological state collapsing into binary defensive logic?
We beat ourselves up so much over willpower.
We do. We constantly berate ourselves for needing more willpower. We tell ourselves we just need to try harder to be patient or stick to our diet or not snap at our spouse.
But willpower implies that you have a steering wheel to grab onto. Think about this 100-millisecond war like driving a car on a sheet of black ice in the dead of winter.
Okay, let's hear it.
A well-slept, high-tone brain is like driving a car equipped with top-of-the-line studded winter tires. When a deer jumps out into the road, the stimulus, you hit the brakes, the tires bite into the ice, the car grips the road, and you calmly steer around the deer. You have control.
Right, the hardware works.
But a tired, low-tone brain is driving the exact same car on the exact same ice, but you are driving on completely bald, degraded summer tires. The deer jumps out, you slam the brakes, and there is zero grip. The physics don't allow it. The car instantly goes into an uncontrollable, violent skid.
You've completely lost the steering wheel.
Exactly. You slam into an automatic reaction. No amount of willpower is going to make bald tires grip solid ice.
The physics of the machine decide the outcome before your willpower even registers the threat. That analogy perfectly captures the total futility of trying to use logic to fix a hardware problem. If deep restoration did not happen, the system is narrowed, it is defensive, and the biological space required for free will simply does not exist.
You're just a passenger.
You become a hostage passenger in a machine that is desperately trying to survive what its broken windshield perceives as a hostile environment.
And when you are a hostage, when agency is completely lost, the car is skidding out of control, and the machine feels terrified and desperate, what does it do? It doesn't just sit there quietly.
No, it acts.
A low-tone machine frantically scans the environment for anything that will provide temporary regulation because legitimate regulation, which is deep sleep, was ignored.
The machine is drowning in stress chemistry, and it demands a life raft immediately. And this brings us to Ian's profound insights on compulsions, and specifically the sleep lie of alcohol.
The sleep lie.
Yes. When tone is low, the machine feels physically agonizing. The internal noise is deafening. Ian makes it clear that inadequate sleep actively pushes the system to seek fast, artificial relief.
And what is faster than pouring a massive glass of wine? Or mindlessly scrolling through TikTok for 2 hours? Or eating an entire sleeve of cookies?
Nothing. The biology of compulsion is deeply tethered to this maintenance deficit. Now, Ian is not making a simplistic, reductive claim that lack of sleep magically causes all addiction.
Right, it's not a straight line like that.
He is making a much sharper structural argument. Sleep debt creates the precise biological void where the machine is incredibly vulnerable and available for relief-seeking behavior. The threshold for resisting a compulsion is physically non-existent because the vagal brake, the thing that says stop, is gone.
Let's really zero in on his treatment of alcohol here, because I think this is a vicious cycle that millions of people fall into every single night.
Oh, absolutely.
People get to the end of the day, their tone is incredibly low, they feel wired from the cortisol but completely exhausted at the same time, so they have 2 or 3 drinks to wind down and help them get to sleep. What does Ian's biological lens reveal about this nightly habit?
He calls it the sleep lie, and it is one of the most critical warnings in underload. To the frantic, low-tone machine, alcohol appears to be a brilliant, highly effective solution. It is a central nervous system depressant.
So it calms things down?
It hits the GABA receptors in the brain, artificially mimicking the calming effect of the parasympathetic system. It forces the machine to settle down and helps you pass out. But Ian forces us to look at the devastating biological invoice that comes due later that night.
It buys immediate sedation, but it pays for it by entirely bankrupting your actual restoration.
The mechanics of how alcohol destroys sleep architecture are brutal. First, it severely fragments your deep sleep and REM sleep, which means the glymphatic waste clearance system we talked about doesn't get to run its full cycle.
The trash stays in the kitchen.
Exactly. But the second half of the night is where the real damage happens. As your liver metabolizes the alcohol, the artificial sedation wears off. And the brain, which had suppressed its excitatory chemicals to balance the alcohol, suddenly experiences a massive glutamate rebound.
A glutamate rebound? What does that actually do to the body while I'm lying in bed?
It triggers a violent rebound sympathetic activation. Your fight-or-flight system kicks into absolute overdrive at 3 a.m. while you are supposedly resting.
Oh, is that why people wake up at 3 a.m. after drinking?
That is exactly why. Your heart rate spikes, your body temperature rises, and you sweat. The result is that you wake up the next morning with an artificial, massive cortisol spike, a shattered vagal brake, and a tone deficit that has now heavily compounded.
So the very thing you used to try and force the machine to rest actually sabotaged the subterranean infrastructure that creates rest. You drank to feel better today, and guaranteed you will feel like a hunted animal tomorrow.
A terrible trade-off.
And this biological reality completely reframes how we judge our own failures. Let's talk about Ian's view on slips. You know, relapsing on a bad habit, losing your temper, breaking a diet, sending a text you shouldn't send. The conventional wisdom views a slip as a sudden, isolated moral failure. Like, I was doing so well, I had so much discipline, and then out of nowhere, I just lost it.
The out-of-nowhere myth is a comforting lie we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Ian dismantles it entirely. His chapter on slips is really a detailed diagnostic chapter about drift. He argues that slips do not come from nowhere. The machine was actively signaling its distress for days, maybe even weeks. The daily tone readings were steadily declining. The daily servicing was drifting.
The check engine light was blinking bright red on the dashboard, and we just put a piece of black electrical tape over it and kept driving.
Exactly. Sleep belongs squarely in the center of that diagnostic story. Because if sleep is the foundational infrastructure of your tone, then a string of broken sleep is not just an annoying background detail, it is the primary causal mechanism of the drift.
It causes the failure.
He takes what most people arrogantly call an isolated lapse of willpower, and he re-diagnoses it as a catastrophic maintenance failure that the operator ignored for a week.
I really want to emphasize this for you listening right now because this perspective is incredibly liberating, but it also demands a terrifying level of accountability.
It's a double-edged sword.
Ian isn't giving you a biological excuse for your bad behavior. He isn't saying you are off the hook for yelling at your kids. He is saying your failure wasn't a sudden lack of moral fortitude in the exact moment of temptation. It was a slow, agonizing maintenance failure in the days leading up to it.
A tired machine is not a weak machine.
Right. It is a machine with reduced margin. The battle wasn't lost when you finally snapped at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. The battle was lost on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night when you stayed up until 2 a.m. scrolling through social media, deliberately neglecting the infrastructure.
It shifts the entire burden of responsibility away from the dramatic moment of crisis and places it squarely onto the quiet, daily, entirely unglamorous routine of maintaining your baseline biological capacity.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate question for the listener. If we want to avoid these traps, if we want to stop drifting and actually reclaim our agency, we have to look at Ian's practical standard operating procedure. We have to look at how we actually service this incredibly delicate machine.
Across all these books, Ian is adamant that sleep must be treated as a rigorous standards issue, not a soft wellness issue.
A standards issue.
In Underload, daily servicing is described as the cost of the tone that makes everything else possible. You don't just achieve a fixed state of high capacity and stay there permanently. The machine requires relentless, non-negotiable daily maintenance.
Okay, let's get incredibly practical. If someone is listening to this right now and realizing they're operating a low-tone machine, living in a distorted, pessimistic reality, where does Ian say they should start? What is the highest leverage intervention?
He makes a very specific and highly biological claim. Assuming you don't have underlying medical conditions like sleep apnea, the absolute most effective sleep intervention you can deploy is establishing an unwavering, consistent wake time.
Wait, a wake time, not a strict bedtime.
A wake time.
Yeah.
He anchors the entire framework to the circadian rhythm. You have to remember, the human body is not a machine that just randomly processes energy. It is a meticulously timed biological system.
Okay, a timed system.
Your circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour clock, dictates the precise timing of your cortisol release, the fluctuation of your core body temperature, and the baseline sympathetic tone that you begin your day with.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this, specifically looking at Chapter 30 of Underload, because this concept of the morning after blew my mind.
It's a game changer.
I always used to think that a night of bad sleep was fully contained to the night. You toss and turn, it sucks, but then you wake up, it's a new day, the sun is shining, and you have a clean slate. Ian says that is absolutely not how biology works.
He says bad sleep rolls forward. The machine wakes up in a very specific compromised state determined by the lack of overnight restoration. The cortisol is high, the waste hasn't been cleared, and here is the critical leverage point. The behavioral choices you make in the very first hour after waking will permanently shape the baseline capacity for the entire rest of the day.
So let's look at standard modern morning habits through this lens. A lot of people wake up feeling utterly exhausted from poor sleep. Their tone is already low, so what do? They hit the snooze button 3 times, fragmenting whatever tiny bit of rest they were getting.
Which is awful for the brain.
Right. They stay in a dark bedroom with blackout curtains. And the very first thing they do is grab their phone off the nightstand and start doom-scrolling the news or Instagram while still lying horizontal in bed. Physiologically, what is happening to the machine in that scenario?
In Ian's model, that behavior is essentially an act of biological self-sabotage. It guarantees a highly reactive, miserable day.
Let's look at the mechanics of the light alone.
Right. By staying in the dark, you are denying the brain the single most important timing signal it requires: morning photons. When bright light enters your eyes, it hits specialized melanopsin cells in your retina.
Okay, melanopsin cells.
Those cells send an electrical signal directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in your brain. That clock then signals the pineal gland to physically shut off the production of melatonin, the sleep hormone, and signals the adrenal glands to release a healthy, regulating spike of morning cortisol to wake you up.
And if you stay in the dark, the master clock has no idea it's morning.
Exactly. The melatonin keeps dripping, the system stays groggy, but you are awake.
And then add the doom scrolling to that groggy state.
Oh.
You are injecting massive, complex, emotionally loaded stimuli news about war, political arguments, highly edited images of other people's perfect lives into a system that hasn't even established its vagal brake for the day. You are flooding a compromised, undefended system with high decibel noise.
He writes that the morning either steadies the machine or depletes it further. If you deplete your tone before the first real trigger of your day even arrives, before you have even stepped foot out of your bedroom, you are already closer to the breaking point than you need to be.
You are actively squandering the tiny bit of capacity the cleaning crew managed to scrape together overnight.
This is where his work in Fix Your Metabolism overlaps beautifully with the sleep framework in Underload. He describes getting morning light into your eyes as a non-negotiable timing signal.
It's not just to wake up.
No. It isn't just about waking you up in that specific moment. That pulse of morning light actually sets a biological timer that dictates the release of melatonin 14 to 16 hours later. The anchor of the morning determines the chemical quality of the following night.
The standard operating procedure is incredibly rigid then. Sleep sets your physical threshold and the morning routine protects it. You simply do not have the luxury of a slow, chaotic, screen-filled morning if you are already operating in maintenance debt.
And this brings us to what is arguably the deepest, most philosophical layer of Ian's entire framework. Because we aren't just talking about tips to feel more energized or life hacks to be more productive at the office. We are talking about something much more profound.
Right. We need to elevate this conversation to what it really represents. We've talked about the hardware, the brain waste, the stress hormones, the mechanics of the eye. But what does it actually mean to surrender to this biological reality? Ian argues that prioritizing sleep, treating it as non-negotiable infrastructure, is the ultimate act of refusing a very specific, very dangerous human fantasy.
It is the fantasy of the disembodied mind.
The disembodied mind.
Throughout history, and especially in modern hustle culture, we desperately love to believe that our intellect, our logic, and our willpower exist on some pristine higher plane, completely separate from our messy physical bodies.
Like we're just brains in jars.
We think we can outthink our physiology. We think that if we are just smart enough or determined enough or stoic enough, we can completely ignore the screaming needs of the machine and just power through on pure mental strength.
And Ian's core thesis in Emotional Mastery completely obliterates that arrogant fantasy. He states unequivocally that logic operates downstream of state.
That phrase should be tattooed on the inside of everyone's eyelids. Logic operates downstream of state.
It is so powerful.
When your biological hardware is compromised, your thinking is no longer objective. It ceases to be logical. Your intellect is conscripted by the primitive imperative of survival. It abandons truth in favor of threat detection.
So what does this all mean? What does this mean for you, the listener, navigating your life tomorrow? It means you have to humble your ego.
The ego hates this framework.
It does. The ego desperately wants to say, I am the master of my universe. I am pure thought. I don't need 8 hours of sleep. Sleep is for the weak. I have an iron will. Ian is looking right at you and saying, you are not a disembodied mind floating magically above a machine. You are running hardware.
And when you neglect that hardware, it writes a panicked, distorted, terrifying story about the world.
And your ego is arrogant enough to later claim that panic story was just how things are.
You mistake the chaotic malfunctioning of your own neglected machine for the objective reality of the universe. This is exactly why sleep is not a soft wellness topic in Ian's books. It is not a footnote at the end of a chapter on productivity. It is a sovereignty topic.
Sovereignty, the absolute right and capacity to govern yourself, to be a sovereign individual, to truly rule your own mind, to have actual biological agency over your choices, to see the world clearly without the funhouse mirrors. You have to start by humbly accepting your biological limits.
You have to submit to the reality of the machine, and you have to service it.
Because without that servicing, you are not sovereign. You are just a reacting component being driven by noise, by stress chemistry, and by a terrifying world that your own broken perception is inventing.
That's a total wake-up call.
Let's pull all of this together because we have covered a massive, life-altering paradigm shift today. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this deep dive into Ian's framework, remember this one truth. Sleep is not about energy. It is the literal, physical, load-bearing condition of your agency itself.
It dictates your tone.
It dictates your tone. It controls that microscopic 100 millisecond gap of free will where the entire trajectory of your life is actually decided. And most frighteningly, it determines whether you see the world as it actually is, or if you are viewing it through a heavily distorted lens of threat, noise, and hopelessness.
It shifts the entire battleground of self-improvement. You cannot fix a physiological state problem with thought alone. The text leaves us with several incredible, piercing journaling prompts to really ground this theory into your daily life.
I love these prompts.
The next time you find yourself overwhelmed, irrationally angry, or drowning in a sense of existential despair, stop trying to logically analyze the despair and ask yourself, what version of the world appears when my machine is not restored properly? Am I trying to win a state problem with thought alone? What do I currently call a character flaw in myself that might actually just be a massive compounding biological maintenance deficit?
Those are heavy, heavy questions. And they lead me to a final thought I want to leave you with. Something to seriously mull over tonight before you make your choices about when to turn the lights off. If our perception of reality, our emotional baseline, and our actual biological capacity for choice are all so deeply, unavoidably tethered to our physical state, to what extent is personality just an illusion,
Wow.
right? Are the people in our lives that we label as chronically difficult, deeply pessimistic, or highly reactive actually just low-tone machines trapped in a permanent, agonizing cycle of maintenance debt? And infinitely more importantly, how much of your own identity, the exact way you define who you are right now, is just the temporary byproduct of how well you slept last night? Think about that tonight as you're sitting on the couch staring at the screen before you decide to stay up for just one more episode. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.